the webinar. So first, many thanks to everyone who is joining us right now in order together to look at the challenges we face over the coming months in the fight against deforestation, in a moment in which the COP will begin in a couple of days, and the European Union is doing all of the work of implementation of the new law against imported products of deforestation. I am Isabel Fernandez, and I will be moderating this webinar. For those who don't know who we are, the Zero Deforestation Alliance is an umbrella organization that with Ecologistas in Acción, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, MITERD, WWF, the National Coordinator of Fair Trade, and Carros de Combate. We work together to help enforce this European norm against deforestation. We're together with María Jesús Sancho, who will open this webinar. And we will then hear from Tom Kuchard from Ecologistas en Acción, who will orient it on the moment that we find ourselves in the fight against deforestation, and then we will introduce the panelists. We have Marta Angolotti, the General Subdirector against the fight against deforestation and deforestation, Dr. Baldov from the Coordination on Forests and Bioeconomy of the Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture, Andrea Carta from Greenpeace International, specifically in the European Union, and lastly, Michael Rice, who is the head of value chains trade in Belgium. So, Director, please, I pass you the floor, and thank you all very much for being with us. Thank you, Isabel. Good morning to everyone. For me, it is an honor to participate in this webinar organized by the Zero Deforestation Alliance, because the interest demonstrated facing the challenges ahead of us in terms of the new regulation recently passed by the European Union against the commercialization of certain products requires the collaboration of all parties. That's the main point I would like to transmit here. The government of Spain, since 2020, through the Ministry for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenges, has begun the partnership for the Amsterdam Declaration in order to promote this elimination of deforestation in the chains of the supply chains in European countries. This, which was proposed in 2020, has had its development and in the process of negotiation on the regulations on European deforestation. This has been led by the General Directive on Forests and Biodiversity, and specifically by the Subdirector on deforestation, with Marta at the head. And she is with us in this webinar. She has followed very closely this whole process. For us, as a ministry, and as the government of Spain, this represents an enormous opportunity, this regulation, in order to fulfill our environmental commitments. that this government has acquired and that has shown through the establishment of a vice presidency for ecological transition, which had never before existed, ranking at the same height as the ministry of the vice presidency of the economy and of work and social rights. And these are the main components of sustainable development. Spain, therefore, is very closely aligned with all of these environmental objectives. And we are also aware that fulfilling all of these represents a major challenge for all of us, not only for us as member states, but also, in this case, as the third countries, the producer countries, which have manifested their concern about this regulation and the limits it imposes in many different fora, in the World Trade Organization, as others, confronting our representative from the European Union. And they've also spoken to the European Parliament, expressing their concern that the obligations imposed by this regulation what we have committed to is to collaborate with these third countries and assist them in the fulfillment of these obligations. We have the text is now active in force since last June, and we're working really for the last several years on negotiating these norms with a interministerial group in which all of the departments have joined, all the ministries with competencies in this field. It looks like it's just about a regulation on wood, but it really goes much beyond that. It applies also to many other raw materials that also are related to deforestation, but also in terms of the obligations it entails. For us, it's very important to be able to spread and explain very clearly the obligations as they affect the different parties to this and who have to take part in this regulation. This has to do with businesses, companies, as well as the countries themselves, especially relevant in a country like ours, which is highly decentralized, and there's a distribution of responsibilities to the regional governments. And so we have met repeatedly with them in order to explain this norm and what it requires of them and the kind of controls that this norm demands of them. And then also civil society. Civil society has to play a key role, a responsible role in the application and the implementation of this regulation. That will be the real test of whether the member states, the business community, and the third countries are carrying this out correctly. The next challenge is to communicate to in December of this year, this which seems just a matter of paperwork in our country is a very complicated issue because we have the regulation of wood as a precedent. We were not able to establish the relevant responsibilities in time, and there was a trial against. Now we have 7 different producers that are in the application of this regulation. And if that multiplication arises, it doesn't have to be 7 by 32, but it will be a multiplication. We will come to a number of competent authorities that for a proper governance would make it quite difficult to manage. So our idea and what we have transmitted to the regional governments and within the government of the central government is the need to assign a limited number of competent authorities, as well as the establishment of mechanisms for collaboration and coordination that will need to work in an efficient and effective way. In terms of the central government, we have met with the other relevant departments, agriculture, trade, the tax authority in terms of trade and tariffs. And we have seen a very variable level of collaboration, but the decision that has been made is that it is this ministry, the Ministry for Ecological Transition, that will take the lead and take the responsibility for the state without that working against the collaboration of other ministries, specifically the Ministry of Agriculture. There are many products that fall under the aegis of the Ministry of Agriculture, but not only the Ministry of Agriculture. The regulation also establishes direct responsibilities for customs authorities. In that regard, there are no problems because they have from the very first moment accepted those responsibilities, and there we expect to see a very adequate fulfillment of obligations. As we also have the obligation to establish a sanctioning mechanism in agreement with it's important to have a mechanism that a fully declared law in order to be able to sanction. We are now in the process of establishing a public consultation. We have the document that will be published shortly in the state website. It's circulating among the other ministerial departments in case they wish to make any changes, but it is basically prepared. This is the law for the fight against deforestation and the control of raw materials. This is the first step that we have to establish in order to process this bill and develop this new law. We hope this will be a very specific law about deforestation and not merely a modification of already existing legislation, broadening the products being regulated. These regulation has an expansive intention. Right now, it's focused on 7 products, but the regulation could easily be extended to others. We believe that it makes more sense that there be a specific legal structure that establishes a system of sanctions and other mechanisms as necessary in order to be able to really enforce this law. It is not a sectorial law, it is a transversal one. And therefore, we believe that the best thing is to provide a specific legal structure on this subject. We also believe it's essential to continue promoting dialogue with all of the parties affected. I want to announce here that in the next COP, we are organizing a parallel event that will be carried out in the pavilion, the Spain pavilion, with the collaboration of the Biodiversity Foundation on responsible supply chains, a key tool for stopping deforestation. And by celebrating this event, we want to highlight the importance of a strong legal framework in order to promote sustainable and deforestation-free supply chains. Spain, in the coming presidency of the partnership of the Amsterdam Declaration, will in spring 2024 receive the multi-stakeholder meeting, which has the objective of establishing an open forum between producer states, consumer states, civil society, in order to promote the production and trade of of sustainable products. We are available for all these initiatives, just like this webinar, which help us to move forward in eliminating the deforestation caused by our consumption, as European society has demanded of us. And so we wish to work together with all parties in order to achieve this together. So many thank you for organizing this webinar and for the opportunity to speak here and to share our concerns and our challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director. We are very happy that we will have a specific rule on deforestation, because we think that it is actually a cross-sectional regulation, and its ambition should be to cover a bigger range of topics. We know that you are quite busy to be able to stay with us during the whole length of our webinar, but at least we hope that you could stay just a little bit, if possible, and just listen to some of our panelists. Just if you allow me just one precision, what is going to be published right now is the consultation, previous consultation, but not the draft. And it's not the bill. It is just a public consultation, previous one, and with it we could start with the draft. But for the time being, we can draw and gather all together the different propositions. Thank you very much for the clarification, and this previous consultation is quite so much needed before creating the bill or the draft, and we will participate, of course, all over the organization from the Zero Deforestation Alliance. And well, without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor to Tom Kuhat, who will give us some context. He will tell us about the current situation framing this webinar. So good morning to you all, and thank you very much for participating in this webinar. Thank you, the General Director for Biodiversity, Woods and Desertification, María Jesús Rodriguez. Thank you also, Thomas Baldov, Michael Rice, Andrea Carta, Malta Angiolotti, and Isabel Fernandez for the implication and the time. Thank you very much also to all of you people who are attending this webinar. Thank you to everyone making this webinar possible, Deforestation Zero Alliance, Ecologistas en Acción, Rebel Streaming, and Zenobia for the interpretation. It's just only a week for the conference of the UN on climate change. So we know at the UNFCCC or the COP28 will start in Dubai. So I'm going to make an introduction on the problem of deforestation for world context in which climatic emergency is getting worse and also worse for resources. I will point out some data on deforestation, the impacts on climate change, responsibility of Spain, and some proposals for the future. I would like to start saying that even though we have heard so many promises in different climate summits to prevent the deforestation and degradation of our woods and other ecosystems, in 2022, deforestation reached 6.6 million hectares all over the world, and it was 21% over the necessary goal to eliminate deforestation for 2030. Also in 2023, global emissions of greenhouse gases increased on a 1%, and if they continue with this path, in 9 years we will go over the 1.5 decrease maximum temperature reached in the Paris Agreement. In Spain, we had an increase of greenhouse gases from 1.7%. 10% richer of human population has 90% of global richness, and they are responsible for most part of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world. Only some of the countries in the world have really put away their greenhouse emission gases from the national budget. But at this rhythm, it will take them several years to reduce issuing 27 times what is agreed in Paris Agreement. It doesn't take into account imported emissions such as the National Integrated Plan of Climate. It doesn't take into account what the Spanish economy is causing abroad to import, for example, palm oil or soy. Well, my first idea is that we need an economic decrease. In year 2023, and the Amazonia suffered one of the worst droughts. So rivers, lagoons, and lakes were drought for the first time in their history, taking with them so many animals and plants. The biggest accountability for this crisis responsibility is upon Repsol, Enagás, or Naturgy, so the big energy companies, but also Bounce, Cargill, GBS, Val companies, or Group of Fuertes, Fortes Group, which is El Pozo, so one of the biggest agro industries, agro companies of the sector. Tomorrow is the World Day Against Consumerism, and Black Friday, from Amazon to Primark, Zara, and all of the companies from the great supply chains are selling us how what is cheap is pushing us to compulsive buying or binge buying. The violence that is exercised with this consumerism is not only from a symbolic point of view of our way of life, but also it has an impact in global production processes, which complexity is invisibilizing the story behind every good. Great European or big European brands are using viscose and leather linked to the deforestation in Amazonia and Borneo due to the lack of control of their governments. Due to the lack of control by the government's lack of monitoring of raw materials and some gaps in both European and Spanish regulations, only the fashion sectors is going to will demand to get fat and to sacrifice 430 million cows annually to satisfy the global demand for 2025. Many of them will be thrown away before that date. Climate change caused by this production and consumerism model is contributing directly to humanitarian emergencies linked to heat waves, fires, floods, tropical storms, and hurricanes, and they are increasing. September 2023, it is a month that we couldn't quite forget. In Libya, Daniel's storm became a huge hurricane because it went through a water zone that shouldn't be as warm as it was, causing floods in which almost 10,000 people died, and so many of them are still missing. In Greece, in 2 days, they had the rainfall that should have they should have for 2 years, and they have lost almost 1/4 of their farming land. Scientific research showed that more than 3 million people are living in areas that are quite exposed to climate change. Between 2030 and 2050, maybe climate change is foreseen, expected to produce almost 300,000 deaths a year, malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. More than 90% of death caused by world catastrophes are happening in the global south that certainly were exploded or and they have not contributed so much to climate crisis. According to a recent study, heat waves killed more than 60,000 people in 2022 in Europe, with higher rates in Italy, Greece, Spain, and Portugal. Science is reminding us all the time that we are near a non-turning back point from a climate point of view. But even though the most important stakeholders in climate negotiations, such as the European Union, are giving more money to grants for farming, industrial farming, and other polluting companies, and also weapons and militarization, the extractivism for mining, they give more money to all of these causes standard for the fight against climate change. If you do not know, we are risking our climate humanitarian right. We have the problems in Gaza, and we are completely against the bombings and also civilian deaths by Hamas. Intergovernmental group for experts on climate change have documented with every new report that deforestation and degradation of the soil are intensifying climate crisis, the loss of biodiversity and they're causing damages to poor people around the world. Between 1990 and 2020, we have lost almost 420,000 thousand hectares of wooden land. Deforestation is deepening the effects of climate change, such as water scarcity, droughts, lack of food. Deforestation is opening virgin land for industrial farming, but it will soon get dry and deteriorate. We know that Mediterranean regimes or diets are one of the main forces for deforestation in the other side of the world, but this problem is not receiving enough attention for international summits, EU or national governments. Greenhouse gases emissions from 5 main meat and dairy companies, GSP is Cargill, for example, they are at the same level as oil companies, the biggest oil companies in the world, such as Exxon. But there's social and environmental crimes for these meat and dairy companies are just impugned. The main responsible for the importation of meat and dairy products are the US, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, and New Zealand, among others. These regions have surplus of production and a huge consumption of per capita of meat and dairy products. What about responsibility of Spain? The report, which is not quite renowned, from the Royal Engineer Academy of 2020, the emissions of greenhouse gases for the agri-food system, and they mark on the food in Spain. They say most part of the emissions in Spain are linked to animal food. In 2021, 15.8 million of tons of raw materials come from the outside of the EU. This is the second biggest importer for the EU of 98 products from countries out of the EU, which is quite interesting. Spain imported in 2021 37% of corn for the EU. It's just a shame that this product is outside of the scope of the regulation, so EUDR. Fresh beef meat or frozen one coming from Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil. It is the third biggest importer for the EU frozen beef meat coming from Brazil. At the same time, we have destroyed many farms in Asturias or Basque country or the north of Spain. Spain is the second biggest importer in the EU from leathers and tanned leather in Brazil, which is linked to fashion industry. Second biggest importer of the EU of cocoa paste from Ivory Coast. The fourth biggest importer of the EU of coffee is Brazil, and the third important of coffee is Vietnam. The second importer for the EU of oil palm is Indonesia and Guatemala. The biggest importer for soybeans in Brazil and other solid residues or from soy in Argentina, also caoutchouc from Indonesia, Ivory Coast, and Thailand, wood or chips from Cameroon, Ukraine, Gabon, or Ivory Coast. Spain, just to sum this up, occupies 11 million hectares of farming land and 10 million of cereal production outside of their borders. Trade has externalized or outsourced social labor impact and environmental ones. Agricultural concentration, conflicts for land holding, slave work, and child work for monocrops, forced displacement, leading to hunger and violations of human rights, such as the right to food and water. So what does it need to change? So the expansion of the agricultural border is one of the biggest problems of our time, and it needs to be addressed with urge. We need to talk out loud and to show good and sustainable agricultural practices such as green agriculture, and we need to reduce 50% the consumption of meat and sugar, at least as I was about 50%, because precision agriculture and green agriculture can feed the world. We have seen it in hundreds and thousands of millions of peasants from indigenous populations in the world. And the UN said in 2013, and in many other scientific reports and studies. Latin America, Caribbean, and Africa and Asia are places that seem to just feed the industry, the European economy and European industry with their natural resources. We need to link this with other questions such as mineral demand for the not so good called renewable energies and digital capitalism and European law on fundamental raw materials. And this year we have accelerated the negotiation on this controversial agreement for EU Mercosur from that can increase deforestation between 620,000 to 1.35 million hectares. That is why we say no to the ratification of this agreement. We need to think about all of this together and to link it to the implementation application of the regulation. Just two more things before and my presentation. You have 2 minutes, Tom. Sure. The mechanisms of the UNFCCC, the different politics on the EU, and also policies from Spain have created a legal, political, and finance infrastructure to push fake solutions such as a carbon market, the compensation of emissions that have that had created a trade with nature. An example is the REDD system for the reduction of deforestation, degradation of woods emissions that had created great inequalities that have been reported by indigenous communities living in the woods, such as colonialists and races. We want to be clear, nature is not a good to trade with, and the so-called green economy can be very dangerous for this capitalism, which is a predator, patriarchal, and colonial. The EU and Spain in particular need to pay their climate debt, which this is very important in international negotiations, and it goes quite beyond the fight against deforestation. And we need to solve this conflict of interest. The same companies for fossil fuels that are accountable for most part of greenhouse emissions are the only ones almost talking in the international summits, and they are not applying their policies on the reduction of the emissions of greenhouse gases. We need to put a way to set aside the big pollutants and the big companies of agro industries and the banks financing these companies. And even the former director of the Framework Convention, Christiana Figueres, for years wanted to include the polluting interests in negotiation, recently said that if the fossil fuel industry is only going to be there to put obstacles to the system, they shouldn't better not be. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for all of you who are going to intervene in a few minutes. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you for this deep and detailed analysis on the situation that we might that we are going to see in this next COP. Let's go now with our panelists. We'll start with Marta Anbolotti. As I was saying before, she's the head of area for the General Directorate for the fight against deforestation for the Ministry of Green Transition and Demographic Challenges. And she's the head of the team who's working for the development of this regulation for the fight against deforestation. Marta, there you go. Thank you very much, Isabel, and thank you very much to all of you from the Zero Deforestation Alliance for organizing this webinar. Of course, it is in our best interest to try to reach all of the corners of societies, showing our initiatives that are quite useful. I would like to start, well, talking about the different progresses that we have made at the European level, not only in Spain, to put into context where are we. So since inception date, since the regulation went into force in summer, as many of you might know, at the European level, European Commission has established a platform for the collaboration for different sectors, civil society and member states of other countries, where they inform through the different transparency processes and through their website. I can write it on the chat if you want to have a look at it afterwards, because as we understand it, it is a very useful way of information to know about the different progresses that are being made.
With regard to these advances, and I don't think it's of interest here to go into great detail, I'm going to tell the steps being taken by the European Union. First, the European Council has an information system developed based on Article 33. It is waiting to publish but the information section is already well developed, and it will begin with a trial period in which the selected companies will do pilot projects. Also, a methodology is being developed for deactivate the risk criteria of the producer countries that's established in the Article 29, and based on the methodology of risk, they can publish lists with the category, the countries or regions of countries. The Common Center for Research has also developed a platform, an observatory of forest for the EU, and has made an initial presentation of this first phase, in which it will establish criteria on deforestation and the existence or not of the forest, depending based on the cutoff date of December 2020. Here our German colleagues can surely give us more information. There's been an initiative of a cooperation of the European Union, which I hope Germany can explain much more clearly. That's in relation to the need to establish a global cooperation framework to uphold this regulation. And the working groups will be activated, working on issues of traceability and smallholders. These are two of the aspects that are most problematic right now because of the difficulty and because of the enormous impact they can have on in third countries. There's also the communication of common questions for the sector that has to apply this regulation. That's tremendously important. There are aspects that must be defined and clarified based on the legislation approved, and the publication of some general directives on how to use these certifications that will be released in early 2024, but it's also on the agenda of the European Commission. Other aspects that the European Union is working on are bilateral activities through delegations in the European Union in these third countries. And as you are well aware, on the platform, they're also working on the evaluation of impact for the first and second review dictated in Article 34 of the legislation and the public consultation that they're required to instigate for this whole process. Also, at the level of the European Union, we're working, these member states, together with the Commission, are working on an informal group made up of various member states, in which our German colleagues are working very actively in order to try to resolve all those aspects that the regulation doesn't detail or clarify adequately. And we understand this is very urgent that these be defined in order to be able to apply this regulation in the most unified and homogeneous way possible throughout the European Union. At the level of Spain, as you know, we are trying to participate in all those sectorial and transversal fora to which we're invited in order to try to explain in the best way possible how this regulation should be applied, the kinds of obligations that it entails. We have a consultation box in order to respond to the doubts that are arising, the questions that are arising. We're also collaborating internationally with the International Foundation for Ibero-American Public Administration, as well as the program Amazonia Plus that's being begun now. We're trying to make sure that all those aspects related to these new regulations be very present in those discussions. We are also at a national level, based on the ministry and with the help of the Biodiversity Foundation, we've established a community of practice, a new line of public-private collaboration called Reforestation and Biodiversity, in which we're trying to get underway initiatives, collaboration initiatives, in order to advise and support companies in their commitment, their obligatory commitment to. So we are trying to accompany them in this. As our director mentioned, we've been in an internal discussion process between the different ministries of the Spanish state, as well as with the regional governments, in order to ensure that this first application of the law be carried out in time. As now that we have a government confirmed, we will begin the confirmation of the reforestation law. I will send a link to that, and it should be spread to all interested parties in order that they contribute in every way possible to the correct application of this law. And as part of the partnership on the Amsterdam Declaration, we are collaborating in every way possible. In the next semester, we will be hold the presidency of this partnership, and we will try to promote a collaboration between all of the countries, of the 10 countries. They're not only member states that are participating in this partnership, attempting to collaborate in a multilateral way, in particular relation with Indonesia and Brazil. We want to continue collaborating with the diverse associations and other entities that collaborate regularly with the Amsterdam Declaration Partnership. As I mentioned before, we will be participating in a multilateral encounter in Madrid next year. And this is what we've been doing at the European and at a Spanish level. The challenges we know are many. From the business sector, there are a lot of concerns about how to carry out this traceability. We have to adapt a lot of trade procedures that's underway, but the requisites demanded by this regulation must be applied. And to this end, we are trying to support them and communicate with them to the extent possible. As the government of Spain and the Ministry of Ecological Transition, we have many challenges of coordination, as we've mentioned, that are very complex in Spain. We hope to reinforce that collaboration. We've learned a lot along the way in the UTR, and we hope that that will help us to give ourselves the sort of most effective frameworks possible. But to that effect, we must have the most complete law possible. In this regard, we hope to continue pressing forward, and that these challenges, well, bit by bit, take these challenges on. That's more or less what we wanted to share. I will include in the chat the link to the Commission's webpage, which I think is of great relevance for everyone here. From our ministry, of course, we are happy to receive suggestions and consultations about this coming law. And once again, I'd like to thank all of the speakers here today for their participation, and to the collaborators, for the participants, for being here, and for all of your work to disseminate and spread this information. This is key. Thank you very much, Marta. I would ask you also, if you can, include in the chat, you mentioned a mailbox in the Ministry of Ecological Transition for questions and suggestions. I think that might be of interest to those that are attending this webinar. I'm sure there are other questions that might be relevant through that box. I would like to encourage everyone that's listening to us. Please remember, there is a question and answer space. So please write down questions where it says Q&A on the bottom of your screen, and we will have an opportunity to address questions and doubts after the initial presentations. Now we will pass the floor to Dr. Thomas Baldorf, the coordinator on of agriculture and I'm sorry. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm just clicking here to stop the translation for me. So thank you very much for the invitation, really, and having me here today and having the chance to contribute to this meeting, to a successful meeting, and of course, all the more to, well, reaching deforestation-free supply chains and products. And, well, having listened to the Spanish director Rodriguez and Marta just now, I have to admit it makes the job easier for me to speak to this topic, of course. I think and you also have seen, it's very good to know that the Spanish presidency is currently in charge and really leading us on the political side in this very specific endeavor. So, but perhaps let me start where perhaps also we from our German side started this discussion, and also knowing that just 2 days ago there was an ADP event, so an event from the Amsterdam Declarations Partnership by our current chair on the Amsterdam Declarations Partnership Belgium. I think the colleague perhaps will do a bit on this one as well. But where I want to start is even a bit further ahead. So in 2015, where right after the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, with SDG 15.2, the target on deforestation had been well, successfully gone through the UN process. And of course, you know that especially this target more or less gives the reasoning and the context for the regulation we are talking about today. In this setting in Paris, at the Paris COP, more or less, where a focus on forest was already there with Article 5 and the only sector that is implemented in the Paris Agreement, or is incorporated in the Paris Agreement. In this setting, the incoming EU presidency from Denmark started work on the Amsterdam Declarations partnership. And I think this is a very important step because it more or less is the cornerstone of some of our work in the group of the Amsterdam Declarations partnership, but also where we from Germany really kickstarted some of those ideas we are discussing today. So as a group of like-minded and ambitious countries, and Marta is absolutely right, it's not only EU member states, but also other European countries. The ADP holds this how to say, the DNA of partnership. I heard this a lot in my work in the ADP. And so the ADP really kickstarted some of those important processes, yes, but right now, it plays the role of the convener and the knowledge broker between producer and consumer countries, and they're within to drive really the discussion on deforestation-free value chains further. So currently the Amsterdam Declarations partnership really can go beyond advocating for the compliance of this EU regulation. This is very much important. And to drive also concrete solutions, developing concrete solutions for deforestation-free value chains in partner countries. And in 2020, when Germany was chairing this really important partnership, and already, well, for you to know, anticipating a regulation, an EU regulation, we really try to capture this approach of the ADP into an ambition statement. And back then, really, the partnership itself went a bit further, also with participation of other member states, like, for example, where thankfully Spain joined. And this is always to be seen in this multi-stakeholder meetings, and very good to know that Spain is kickstarting something next year again on this side. This is really, really helpful and very much appreciated, of course, from our side. So, but coming back to this as a context, more or less, for the Amsterdam Declarations partnership and our work there. Perhaps going back to the regulation or focusing on the regulation itself and where we are working, where is the progress and what difficulties and challenges we do see there. Well, the EU regulation itself, we do see as a milestone regulation for global forest protection and their sustainable management. The German government is really very active, but it's not only very active, but also very much united in this endeavor. And as Marta just said, the platform meetings from the Commission, I think you can see that those active ministries are working in this in the same direction. But why is it that there are several ministries? So just perhaps to state this, the Ministry for Food and Agriculture, where I come from, is in lead, but we are very much appreciating that our work is complemented by the really important parallel work from the Ministry for Environment, from the Ministry for Development Cooperation, from the Ministry for Economics, and our Foreign Office. So this is really, we go all in, so to say, for this issue. And why is this? Well, it's quite important. The regulation is really, really complex, and it holds relations to several policy areas. And so internal coordination from the German government is really key. So coming to the progress, perhaps let me just display a bit where we are active currently, and I would try to group this into those three pillars of work where we are quite active from our side. And so first, there's support for national stakeholders to comply with the regulation. You know, there are several specific commodity fora in Germany on cocoa, on palm oil, protein, and soy. But in the context of national guidelines that we guidelines on deforestation we had in our cabinet in 2020 already, and anticipating of this regulation, we had founded another initiative. It's called the National Multi-Stakeholder Forum on Deforestation-Free Value Chains. And this has been done in 2020. And we are using, of course, this forum now to really work on this regulation and to come to solutions for specific questions in it. The participation is currently around 250 stakeholders. We included economic actors, scientific actors, and a big bunch of civil society actors. And the mode of work is more or less it's an exchange with multipliers. So we really count on a multiplication of our discussions into the specific fields of those participating. And the content in the past, perhaps just easy to say, it's more or less mirroring and exchange on the negotiations we had on this regulation. But currently, the content is a bit different. So we are discussing the present state of implementation on this regulation, both on the EU and the national scale. It's really important for everyone to know, to have this transparency, what is happening in Brussels, also to really work on in their specific fields, proactive work, and come to a solution for specific issues. So topics in the forum are more or less equal to difficulties and challenges seen, but also progress seen by the stakeholders. We are currently really working on concrete action, complying with the provision and translation, or translating more or less those provisions into standard management procedures in the specific fields. And of course, we do hear a lot the request for commodity-specific guidance. And we in-depth discuss the frequently asked questions we had from the Commission, which Marta was just elucidating on. So where we do see is also discussions happening in our national forum on the progress in various developments of the Commission, be it the information system or the benchmarking. And I think just next week, we will have the next meeting of our national stakeholder meeting. And there we will focus on supply chain management systems. Really, how can this regulation be translated into the standard procedures? And we are very much looking forward to those presentations we will have there. All those presentations are online. So perhaps after I have spoken, I can just copy those links, or the main link to our website, but I'm really sorry, it's a German website, but the presentations, I think you will spot them. That's no problem. So that's the first pillar of work. The second one is rather connected to checks and controls. So we are currently also working, of course, on a national implementation law. And perhaps you saw my astonishing hiccup when the director said that the Spanish law is almost there, but it was then put in another dimension. So I think it's comparable on the German side. We are really working on this, but definitely not there yet. So you can imagine it's quite complex to work on this national law because, well, in Germany, we have a specific issue that there are 16 Bundesländer, federal states, and respective responsibilities for national production of cattle, wood, and soy. So there's quite something to do in this regard on the national law. But we are working with a competent authority to be. So we are about to finalize our work in this regard. It will be, I think I can say, the federal agency that has already been active on EUDR, so the EU timber regulation, and we are currently working on what are the content side, what they have to do, what are the financial implications, and the specific issue in Germany, as just said, with the relation to our Bundesländer. The third level of work, I think, is, well, how to say it? It's upholding the political ambition and efficient solution in the EU process and the international process. So perhaps not to be cited, but the team Germany, how we were called in the last platform meeting from the Commission. We really participate, so to say, all in. So we work on the platform that Marta has just said. We work in the future focus groups on those two issues, on transparency and integration of smallholders. We have been an early tester for this information system, which has been quite useful in our regard. And quite currently, and this is really thanks. Well, you have to hear this, and thanks to Marta, really specifically, we are part of the Friends of this FAQ group, being led by the Commission and the Spanish Presidency. This is really helpful, and I can only underline it because we need this common understanding how to proceed and how to work with the provisions in the regulation itself. But also, we are active on Article 30 of the regulation, which is what we have just heard. Also, a specific approach that we have integrated and incorporated in this regulation. So the strategic cooperation, or the Team Europe initiative, which is really in our view a very important issue. So the comprehensive strategic framework for cooperation with third countries, in our view, is really an essential element in order to reach the envisaged impact of this regulation itself. Together with other member states, we stressed this already in the past negotiations, and but currently we really see the clear necessity to complement our activities within the EU with all member states to prepare for an impactful application of this milestone regulation, with activities to support third countries in this regard. We really have to underline this. We cannot leave them alone with our regulation. So as reflected in our positions that we had throughout the whole process of the last 2 years, we do see this necessity, in particularly valid for the engagement of smallholders, counteracting a potential exclusion from the supply chains to the EU, and all the more, of course, safeguarding their continued existence in a more sustainable environment. And I'm quite happy to state that just last Monday, my minister in the Agricultural Council really underlined the relevance of this approach, and also in terms of the envisaged impact on global forest protection. So he also emphasized the importance of other member states to join the active support in this regard and on this approach, and in particular of the Team Europe initiative. And of course, we will do something to really follow up action in this regard. But this is be done by several ministries from Germany, as I just said. So the team Germany is quite active in this regard. So to say, we are trying to uphold the compromise and the improvements we really see in this regulation that we reached in trilogue. There are 3 elements or pillars again, which we do see necessary action on. So it's ambition, it's efficiency, and it's legal certainty. Those are the 3 really center cornerstones where we need to uphold those improvements. And last point, and then I will just hand over to Isabel again. Perhaps we do see the necessity also to follow up action in other fora, so with other consumer countries, to really counteract already on leakage. We used other fora like G7, G20, or also the meeting of agricultural ministers in January in Berlin. It's the Global Forum for Food and Agriculture, and happy for you to join this. Perhaps I will just copy the link as well into the chat. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Thomas. It's very interesting to know about the work of other member states and how are you approaching all the implementation work for the regulation. We are going now to continue with Andrea Cata. He belongs to Greenpeace International and also belongs to the European Union. Andrea, please go ahead. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. I come from Sardinia, So I'm a little bit from Catalonia or from Aragon, I would say, but nevertheless, I would like to continue in English and you could have
that's
the
pretty
Spanish.
much what you've heard is pretty much where my Spanish begins and ends. I think it's been so far like a very interesting discussion. It's quite interesting. I have to take a little moment, okay, to adjust the screen. I was saying it's been a very interesting discussion, and it gives the idea or like the magnitude of the effort that is required to implement correctly this regulation. But at the same time, we have to be aware that I mean, there is nothing really esoteric, and that the law is quite precise on what is requested of member states, and above all, what is requested of operators and traders. And I think that what we would like to do is 3-4 minutes is to like go into a very concrete aspect of the regulation, and to discuss a little bit the creation of the competent authorities and what are the features that these competent authorities must respect. I mean, this is going to be really step one of the implementation, and this is something that we are as NGOs like monitoring very closely. I think I wanted to start like a little bit of a discussion on Article 13, paragraph 4 of the regulation, which sets out, let's say, like the scene in terms of the enforcement by requiring that competent authorities have sufficient powers or adequate powers, adequate functional independence, and adequate resources in order to perform the task that they are assigned. It is important to bear in mind, and this is especially for member states, that competent authorities under the EUDR are like an enhanced version compared to competent authorities for the EUTR, and this is not only due to the extension of the material scope, that there are more commodities in the EUDR than before with the EUTR, but the fact that competent authorities have a broader range of powers and obligations. They have to perform checks, they have to intervene when they see products that present high risk and need immediate intervention. They have to be able to cooperate with other competent authorities and with customs. They must be able to require operators and traders to take corrective action. And they have a joint obligation with the Commission to continuously monitor and exchange information on change in trade patterns. There is a clear obligation, and it's quite comforting to hear that Spain is already taking action to have at national level the necessary legal provisions so that a competent authority can work smoothly and can do whatever it needs to do. It hasn't been the case with the UTR. We have seen repeatedly competent authorities failing to act because they essentially did not know what their mission were. And so they were, instead of imposing sanctions, they were sending like recommendation on advisory opinion to operators that were found in breach. And that resulted in us having to go to court and ask courts to say, well, actually a competent authority is there to act. And what we want to see and what the law requires is that the competent authorities have clear and detailed powers to perform their mission. The second aspect that is quite important, that is very innovative in the EUDR compared to the previous regulation, is the notion of functional independence. That's, I mean, sounds new in our context. In reality, that has existed in EU law since decades. It's a concept that exists in other domains, such as the regulation of transport or of electricity and gas, and we have it now here in our deforestation regulation. What does it mean? It means that European law cannot ask member states to create an absolutely independent authority, you know, like out of the blue, because that's not the role of the EU to dictate how national administrations must be organized. But what is important is that when a competent authority functions, its decision-making and its mechanisms are separate from those of other branches of the administration. And this is something that is also very important from a conceptual standpoint, because we hear very often competent authorities thinking that they have to help companies or that they have to, let's say, like support a given sector. No, this is maybe a legitimate task of a ministry, but the competent authority is essentially there to enforce the law, and there must be the necessary checks and balances so that it does it autonomously. Lawyers like to call them Chinese walls, you know, so that there is a good separation between what the competent authorities does to enforce the law and what the rest of ministries do to, I don't know, support the timber sector, the livestock sector, and so on and forth. And this is an obligation that the Court of Justice has spelled out very clearly in terms of functional independence being a situation in which the competent authority is not subject to any undue influence, undue external or internal influence. And this is when we think of the design of the competent authorities, is very apparent in three sectors. I mean, the first one is the appointment of the directors. That is like the directors of the competent authorities must not fear that they will be removed if they step on the feet or on the toes of, let's say, like a big company or a company that has close link with the political sector. So first of all, the guarantee is that the management will be stably appointed and will not be blackmailed by the political level. The second element is the possibility to take decisions autonomously, because it frustrates the very notion of independence, the fact that the director of a competent authority would have to ask, let's say, like the director of a ministry or the minister itself, if they can inspect or sanction a company. There has to be the possibility of making decision only having regard to the interest of the enforcement of the law. And this must be clearly reflected in, let's say, the DNA, the constitutive act, the laws that define the way the competent authority work. The third element, and here I say, like, play the cue note to Michael's intervention, is money. The competent authority cannot act independently unless it has at least like a separate, sufficient budget to carry out its task. Again, like, I'm not inventing anything. These are things that are well present in the case law of the European Court of Justice. So I'm just like relating what the case law say. Competent authority must have access to resources, and these resources must be sufficient. This is a clear element or aspect of its functional independence. If there is no money, the competent authorities will not be able to act. If it is afraid to lose money, the competent authority will think not to upset anyone. So there have to be clear rules, again, in the DNA of the competent authority that allows it to plan its activity and carry them out, let's say, like in a situation of relative, well, it is functional independence. I think I stop here, but I just wanted to, let's say, put on the table a very concrete problem. I think it's problem number one that needs to be solved. We've heard it today, and I would like to then leave the floor to Michael that will continue on this note with also other with other considerations. I think I must also have exhausted my time. I cannot hear you. Isabel, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I had my mic off. Okay, thank you very much, Andrea. Very interesting, these points that you provide to this debate, because indeed, well, we'll have some time to discuss them in greater detail, but it definitely nuances the understanding of the competent authorities. Now, Michael Rice, last will speak. They're telling me that they're including the various links that Thomas Baldauf and Marta Angolotti have mentioned in their talks. Make sure that you can access those. Please, Michael, you have the floor.
Thank you, Isabel, and good morning, everyone. Good morning, fellow panelists. And also thank you to the Alianza Zero Deforestation for the invitation to be with you. It's greatly appreciated. Like Andrea, I will speak in English, so thank you also to our interpreters, and I'll be sure to speak slowly so that you can do your job well. As Andrea mentioned, I think the main message that I want to deliver is that even though we've heard some speakers say that implementing the EU deforestation will be challenging, implementing the law is 100% possible if it is given a political priority and the resources that it deserves. And I think in this conversation, as Tom, I think the message that Tom gave in his introductory remarks, I think we need to bear this in mind, because at the bigger picture, it's absolutely crucial that the EUDR has an impact and that it delivers results quickly. It really has to reduce the EU's deforestation footprint in short order, not only for the law to have an impact in its own right, but perhaps more importantly, for the EU deforestation regulation to have appeal and credibility as an example to be followed in the global fight against deforestation, climate change, and biodiversity loss. And I think in the context of this discussion, the EU and its member states are in a very good position to be talking about fighting deforestation at COP28 in Dubai. The EUDR is a groundbreaking law that is an essential part of the EU's plan to meet its climate commitments. And it really should be promoted to other major consumer countries like the US, like China and India, as an example to be followed as soon as possible. However, putting ourselves in the shoes of the US, China, India, and other countries, I mean, it's likely that they will want to wait to see how the EUDR is implemented and the impact that it has. And it's for this reason that strong, effective, and coordinated implementation from day one by Spain and other member states is absolutely crucial. Now, this means that member states must be ready to enforce the law by the 30th of December next year. And that's a legal obligation on member states. And that means they must have, as Andrea mentioned, must have their national enforcement frameworks and their competent authorities in place, equipped, and ready to go. Now, of course, that is a challenge. The challenge is that member states have a lot of catching up to do, and their enforcement agencies have a lot more work to do compared to the EU timber regulation. And to put that in context, I mean, Tom already gave some figures about Spain's role in the EU and the import of forest-rich commodities, but I think these facts bear repeating to give a sense of the additional work required for Spain to meet its legal obligations under the EUDR. So, for example, Spain is the biggest importer in the European Union of soybeans from Brazil, soy oil cake from Argentina, and natural rubber from Côte d'Ivoire and Thailand. So logically, this suggests that of all member states, Spain should dedicate the biggest resources to controlling those supply chains. But Spain is also the second biggest importer in the EU of tanned leather from Brazil, palm oil from Indonesia and Guatemala, cocoa beans from Cameroon, cocoa paste from Côte d'Ivoire. It's the third biggest importer of chilled beef from Uruguay, frozen beef from Brazil, cocoa paste from Ghana and Cameroon, coffee from Vietnam and Uganda, and palm oil derivatives from Indonesia, and the list goes on and on. Now, I mention this to give a sense of the workload and the work required of the Spanish competent authorities, because as you can imagine, to be the biggest importer in the European Union, or even one of the top three, it means that there are huge volumes of these products flowing into Spain. And this doesn't even account for the volume of products entering Spain from other member states that will also be subject to the EU deforestation regulation. So Spain's competent authorities will have legal obligations to monitor and control those supply chains, to ensure that the products are legal and deforestation free, and that the companies involved in those supply chains are complying with their obligations under the EUDR. And this work will require sufficient staff with expertise and experience on the new commodity sectors subject to the deforestation regulation, which are produced, harvested, processed, and traded in very different ways to wood products. Now, the question of resourcing is fundamental to delivering this work. Now, Andrea already mentioned some of the crucial obligations on competent authorities. Obviously, those include obligations to carry out a minimum number of annual checks on operators and traders for each commodity sector, as well as obligations to take immediate action whenever a high risk of non-compliance is identified before products are placed on the market. Now, this implies that competent authorities must have the capacity to very quickly assess the information they receive about products entering the market and to take immediate action if necessary, including in coordination with customs agencies. Now, this isn't only about the number of checks, but really the quality of checks must also be guaranteed, and resourcing is crucial there because competent authorities must also have the capacity to carry out spot checks, field audits, potentially in third countries, and to access technical and scientific expertise, which is all contemplated in the text of the regulation. Importantly, they must also have the capacity to respond to complaints from the public or industry actors, what's called a substantiated concern, and to respond to those without delay. The legal obligation on Spain and on all other member states, as Andrea mentioned, is to provide their competent authorities with the resources to fulfill this obligation. And like Andrea said, those resources must also be provided in a way that guarantees the functional independence of the competent authorities. And the Court of Justice has some good jurisprudence that explains that access to resources must be guaranteed, it must be independent, and that's something that really must be taken into account. I think just in closing, to again emphasize that, and it was quite promising to hear Director General Rodriguez emphasize the importance of collaboration here, because Spain is not alone in this challenge. And we hope that Spain and Germany, the ADP platform is a fantastic forum for collaboration. And it's important that member states are collaborating, speaking to each other in this crucial phase of setting up the implementation and enforcement framework, and bringing in other important countries like Italy, the Netherlands, and France, and other big importers and consumers, to ensure that there is a consistent development of the national enforcement rules, risk criteria, procedures, ways of working with customs agencies in other member states, as well as third countries, to ensure that there is a diligent and consistent application of the law across the EU. Because I think the important message is here, like, yes, implementation will be a challenge, but the real challenge, as Tom sketched out, is making sure that this law has an impact. And as I mentioned, implementing this law is 100% achievable if it is given the priority and the resources that it deserves. And I'll conclude there and pass the floor back to you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Isabel.
Thank you, Michael, for your contributions. So we will now begin the debate. I don't know if after the presentations of Michael and Andrea, I don't know if Marta or Thomas would like to respond. I have a lot of questions, so I would be happy to transmit those questions. I think there are a lot of issues here that we're very concerned about when it comes to the implementation of this regulation, but I don't know if our other speakers would like to comment or ask questions. Well, Isabel, we're working on it. We're intensely interested in this and interested in these resources and this support. We're working on it. For me, initially, I have the doubt of how are we going to have the resources necessary for the full development of this regulation. If in this case, both Germany and Spain are dimensioning, if they're scaling the resources that they will require, what are we talking about here? We recognize that the work has begun to understand how many operators are affected by this regulation. Has this work been done yet? How do we have a sense of the dimensions of the resources required for this? From the perspective of with regard to importation, there's a lot of very precise information because everything has to go through the customs. As long as it's declared correctly and with the correct code, we do have that information, and we are working on a first analysis. It's more difficult in the internal markets because there is no registration established based on the existing nomenclature. We've got a code system that are applied in the custom system, but is not in use in internal trade. So it's difficult to determine how many operators within the internal economy, how many we're talking about, how many the supply chain is complex, and at the moment it's very difficult to figure out this. Once this begins working, the system of codes will have to be applied to all sectors. They will have to make use of this terminology, this nomenclature, this system of codes, and that will allow us to really assess the scale of what's happening within the internal market. In terms of importation from abroad, thanks to the code system already existing in the customs, that's much easier to assess. we're requesting resources in order to do this, but at the moment it's hard to know exactly how many operators we will have to supervise, or at the moment we have a basis in which we understand that everything is a sort of standard middle ground between high risk and middle risk, but that uncertainty prevents us from understanding exactly how many controls or checks we're going to have to conduct. Thank you, Marta. Thomas, I don't know if you'd like to add something to that. How are you working on this in Germany? How are you assessing how many trade organizations or operators or manufacturers we're actually talking about here?
Yes, thank you very much. And I just take the opportunity perhaps to add 3 more layers of complexity, so to say, but not only saying it's complex. Perhaps I start with the first one of feasibility. So from the German side, we are obliged, before we go into a political decision, to in-depth analyze the feasibility of any process, of any political process in reality. And as I just perhaps described a lot also, is that, of course, we used our National Stakeholder Forum to mirror those issues, those duties, those provisions of the regulation itself with stakeholders, civil society and science, but also, of course, on the political scale, both on the federal side, but also on the federal state side with 16 federal states. So yes, we also think that this regulation is feasible, but it's quite complex. And I wanted to perhaps just go again this path as Marta just described, on the import-export scale and the national production. That's a case from our side as well. But let me start with perhaps describing those dimensions a bit differently and the complexity of the regulation. So first, we have 6 further commodities. I think this is very, very much appreciated from our side, because we did not just think, okay, we can do timber, let's do something else. No, of course, the idea behind was to get the impact. And here the analysis from Commission was really key, both from the feasibility study in 2016 to 18, but also in the course of the communication and the regulation proposal itself. What are those relevant commodities and products where we really do share our contribution from the EU side to global deforestation? I think this is very important to state again, but of course this means some complexity. But there's another dimension of complexity in the regulation itself. It's not only the concept which we had in the EUDR, that the first operator needs to fulfill their provisions, but also the next ones, the next operators and traders. And this is very, very much important, as elucidated by, I think, various sessions from the Commission, but also from us, from member states, as we think that there were perhaps some possibilities to circumvent the past issues or provisions that we had in the EUDR, but now it's really an enhancement, an improvement, so to say, in this new regulation to really fill those blanks, or to get to a better and perhaps stricter level of compliance. So, but this has to do with then complexities and numbers for especially those issues. How many traders do we have to control, checks and do our checks and controls? And that's not so easy, I have to admit. But I don't want to bore you with very much details in this. But this really has some impact on the complexity. From the side, as Marta just described, we had the same approach from customs, and then more or less, checking with other political processes where we do have some monitoring scale of what to expect, how many million due diligence statements will be there, how many operators will be there, how many traders will be there. And I think having 6 more commodities and this trader perspective for everyone to count more or less with 10 times the activities from the EUDR is quite a good prospect or on this approach. But still, what I wanted really to underline, and again to underline what Michael just said, the one side is to comply with the regulation and to find solutions for this. But the other side is the impact that we are reaching out with this. And that's why I really had this in my previous intervention, that we are trying to get others on board, that we are trying to get other countries on board in several other processes in this. And COP28 might be perhaps not a deal breaker, but something where EU can really go in and try to get this message out. And I do see some good approaches to this, and I hope this will be followed by those political leaders in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. I think you mentioned that in German you are moving forward in the designation of competent authorities. So since this regulation is an inheritor of the regulation on timber, and there were competent authorities already assigned for the control of timber trade, I wonder if they're going to be the same authorities in the case of Germany. And in the case of Spain, I would also like to ask Marta about this. Thanks to what Marta said and also what the director said, it seems that that wouldn't be the case, that it would be a broader competent authority. But I would ask you both to explain in somewhat greater detail. It would be a shame to lose all the learnings from the timber authorities, but it seemed that their work was not considered really effective. So with this new regulation on deforestation, gives more guidelines for competent authorities. And I'd like to know a little bit more about how you're approaching this issue. We understand the great complexity, especially in the case of Spain with its autonomous communities, its regional governments, and in Germany with its federal state structure, which entails lots of different actors. And we wonder what kind of actions are being taken to ensure that the response be uniform, not only within these different geographical authorities, but at different levels. Thank you.
I don't know who to start. Marta, do you want to start or shall I? Okay. Okay. Then I'll just continue perhaps. Yes. As I was approaching this meeting today and our first intervention, I think I can build on this. So I said that from our side, there's a federal unit who was in charge as competent authority under the EUDR, and they have drawn a lot of lessons in the past 10 years, absolutely. The impact that we wanted to reach in terms of reduction of deforestation or halting deforestation, global deforestation, and our footprint, our contribution was not reached. This is not really a question of the competent authority. I can only say in Germany, but of course there are other approaches to really reach this overall or overarching goal. So to say, we received just when we were just before when we were starting the negotiations on the regulation, we received a really very neat and complex evaluation of the past 10 years from our side. Self-criticism included, absolutely, yes. But to guide us through the process, what a future regulation would need. And this is, well, I would say all those issues are in there in the new regulation. And we heard this from previous speakers as well. So what we do have is an EU uniform approach now to the competent authorities. It's way stricter than what we have seen under EUDR. We have a very complex. Well, I'm using complex quite a lot today, but it's a very intensified approach for checks. We have quotas in there. We have quotas that you have to fulfill in the regulation. So it's really something where the regulations, the provisions on checks and controls are very much stricter, and we very much appreciate it from our side to come to a EU uniform application of this regulation from the checks and control side. So this, we very much think that we reach this, it brings us more to the ultimate goal of this regulation in terms of the regulation and the checks and controls. So another issue, I think that where we think, yeah, the regulation could have been perhaps a bit stricter is perhaps the question on other ecosystems. So what we have now is a regulation on the ecosystem forest. We do think that this is very much important and we do need this. But from our side, Germany had asked for some enhancements in the regulation, and one, of course, being quite prominently is perhaps another ecosystem, what we call in the international definition scale, other wooded land. So what we thought we could have had a bit in this regard is that, of course, due to well, the reasoning behind it, that we saw already negative impacts of production in those included commodities on other wooded land, and scenarios where a regulation as now active could really lead to, well, concentrating on forests could lead to enhanced ecosystem leakage, so to say. So those are past experience, I think, that we really spent also into the topic. Of course, you all know what happened, that part of the package we do see from the proposal now to the regulation itself is that this was currently yeah, not possible, I would say. There was we had to decide between pace and ambition, but very much appreciated that we do have very important issues in the review itself in there. So those review mechanisms, or the review mechanism itself, is really important to guide us through future adaptations of the regulation. So this is something perhaps I wanted to spend again also into this discussion, because when you ask me about experiences from the past, this is something where we should draw some lessons from, and really go into a future application. So the concrete answer to your concrete questions, yes, it will be the same competent authority for Germany as we had under EUDR, with adapted opportunities, possibilities, provisions that we see from the regulation itself. And that's why it's taking some time, but it's only end of November, so we still have 1 month to go, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I will continue. From our side, We are starting leading the negotiation as coordinators of EUDR, directly responsible for FRED regulation. But in the EUDR, the ministry, well, it was a regulation that was applied inside of the home market. We didn't have direct competencies. So our functions were functions of coordination, representation, but not enforcing, or not direct enforcing. So in this sense, this new regulation with the border control that we have supported from the very beginning because we thought it essential is quite different from the former one. Therefore, under the EUDR, we will have direct competencies in border controls or in customs in this sense. So there is a huge difference regarding EUDR. As we were saying, and as Thomas was saying, EUDR are giving much more precise tools, clearer also, regarding EUDR, and hopefully will be more homogeneous in their application. It's in its application, the application of these positions. From our side, we are trying to promote, as our director said at the beginning, we are trying that that the implementation process gets as simplified as possible for our regions also, because we don't have abundant lands, but we do have autonomous regions too. Maybe the finalization will be in their hands finally due to the competencies. Regarding coordination, EUDR had many good points, and bad ones too. We need to learn from past mistakes. The coordination must be reinforced. And this is one of the aspects that we would like to include into the legislation to the extent that it is possible. I don't know if maybe you want to go through the questions that we have from the chat already, or if you want me to elaborate a little longer. Well, Michael or Andrea, do you want to give a final contribution very quick, please, because we have some questions in the chat and maybe they are quite interesting for you to read and to answer. Andrea or Michael? Andrea is raising his hand, so Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Isabel. I know we're running out of time, but perhaps just two quick comments to make. I think importantly, particularly in sort of complex national sort of administrative arrangements like there is in Spain and Germany, the deadline to sort of resolve those at a structural level is really the end of this year, when the competent authorities must be designated. I wish you all the best with that, Isabel and Thomas. To come back to the point on resourcing, I think really the priority, the deadline to be ready to enforce the regulation is the end of next year. And so really the priority for 2024 needs to be around ensuring that the designated competent authorities have the staff, the technical knowledge of the various commodity sectors, and clarity about their working procedures to be able to coordinate with each other, but also with other enforcement agencies, customs at the national level and across the EU. And so ensuring, a consistency in resourcing and capacity at the subnational level will be an important part of that for Spain and Germany. And the second quick point I wanted to make is that this should really be seen as an investment. We need to get the basics right, as an investment in the national contribution to reducing the EU's deforestation footprint, to achieving national commitments on climate and biodiversity. But one important provision that's also worth pointing out is the ability for member states to authorize their competent authorities to recover their costs in cases of non-compliance. And so I think, an investment in enforcement capacity will deliver not only environmental returns, but may potentially deliver financial returns, where competent authorities are good at their job and have the resources to do it properly. In cases of non-compliance, they will be able to recover those costs. And we really encourage all member states to include powers to do that in their national enforcement frameworks.
Thank you very much, Michael. It is a very important point to highlight. When we are giving resources to competent authorities, we need to take into account the fact that it can be possible to reimburse the cost or to recover the costs and get of non-compliance. We have also Joachim from Austria. He's a colleague that is with us among the panelists. Please, Joachim, be brief because we don't have much time left. Thomas need to leave in a couple of minutes, so please tell us about the situation in Austria. And afterwards, I would like at least to share at least a couple of questions from our audience. So, Joachim, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for this webinar. I tried to be brief since the importance of the establishment of corporate competent authorities was mentioned and the coordination between member states highlighted as key in achieving a strong regulation. I just wanted to give a short insight into the situation in Austria. I think Austria might not be the biggest importer of the agricultural commodities within the EU, but it's certainly one of the biggest traders when it comes to wood and timber. It is actually one of the biggest importers of roundwood timber, and it has some of the biggest companies like HS Timber Group, Eckach, Kronospan that are very much involved in the production of blockboard and chipboards and so on. This just as a background. But here the situation is that the competent authority has been nominated, which will be the forest agency, same agency that has also been the competent authority within the EU timber regulation. And there will be some help from another agency, but there remain a lot of questions. To make it short, there are questions around the functional independence, which Andrea Carter has highlighted, which is important. Is the questions around what powers they will have, the competent authorities, how they will collaborate with the administrative penal authorities, which are in many cases regional. And there are similar issues like in Germany, where you have like federal states and there needs to be a lot of coordination. And of course, the issue of resources. Will there be enough staff and budget? And perhaps one important point also that the others have not mentioned yet is what kind of checks will they actually perform, and will those checks get to the bottom of things? There are questions around capacity building, so that which Michael Rice has already pointed out, have the knowledge and clarity to perform the checks. To clarify whether the products are compliant. And of course, we also have a accompanying law coming out, which is currently being drafted. And it will be, I think, be subject to a consultation process only in January or February. So we don't have a consultation process flowing into the drafting process, which is kind of unfortunate. And but it's good to hear at least that in Spain this is the case. So I think just to give this short insight, and I think the question still is, how can we ensure that we have a good collaboration between the member states and that we have a robust sanctions mechanism that is not very different from one member state to the next. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joachim. I think that it was very clear in your intervention, the need of collaboration between member states to develop not only the functioning of competent authorities, but also the different plans of control and the other mechanisms and tools. We have some questions in the chat. One of them regarding with regard to Spain. So for Marta, what is the content of the law that is being prepared? And is it only going to have an impact on sanctions, or also it will impact on the expected system for the EUDR? Well, the norm includes the sanctioning process, sanction mechanism. Of course, we would like to include cooperation mechanisms also, but we don't establish specific requirements for the application of the companies, because the regulation is actually and already establishing its application. What the norm says, the rule says what needs to be applied, but we are not going to include any specific nor additional requirements. So it is a regulation, and we have the instructions from the EU, and our law is not going to go beyond the aspects already on the EUDR. Thank you very much, Marta. I think it is quite clear. Another question from a small regarding the small producers of beef meat. From a bureaucratic point of view, are they going to be considered as big for the companies or big meat beef companies? In the rule, we do not see the difference between physical. There's no big differences between physical person, SMEs, or big companies, beyond their responsibility to answer to what they are doing. Which means that small farmers in Spain, they need to submit their documentation before they sell their products or they put their products into the market, same as the big companies. But their charges are different because they are smaller than big companies. Nothing to do when we talk about a system for a small Spanish farm than the document that the meat importation at large scale that come from big companies or from another country. So the obligations are the same, but the scale or the content is different, or at a different scale, since supply chains are different too in size. But Spanish farmers are operators, and they have the same obligations as operators. And as I was saying, the difference are just in size, but there are also some specific regulations, some specific clauses for SMEs, and some requirements, transparency requirements for big companies that are different regarding the small farmers or small producers. Thank you very much, Marta. Andrea would like to add another contribution, maybe regarding the previous answer. Well, Marta is right, in my opinion. I think that the question has been answered. And I think that first it is important not to be afraid.
If you have a very short supply chain, the application of the law is going to be very easy. You also have to see it as an opportunity, because if you are a small rancher, a livestock farmer, and you don't have sustainability problems because you know your cows, you know where they're eating and what they're eating, you produce your meat, that makes it easier for you, because you can enter the market as a sustainable producer. So they should not only see the difficulties imposed by this regulation, but also see it as an opportunity. This is not just bureaucracy. It should be something that promotes small-scale farmers to be able to promote themselves as sustainable. There's a lot of negative publicity about this regulation, as if it's going to generate expenses and so on, but this is not actually the case. Thank you, Andrea. I want to stay with what you've just said, that this is a regulation that is difficult to develop and implement, but it does represent an opportunity to step forward, not only in the fight against deforestation, but also in general to move towards more sustainable food systems generally. I'd like to thank everyone who has participated here today, to the translators, Rebecca and Maggie, for their fantastic work, and thank you. Also, to all of those who have been listening today, we've overstepped the time a little bit. There was one more question, but it seems to me that the ones that we selected more or less approximately covered the other ones. I'm sorry if that's not been entirely the case. We will pass the questions on to the panelists, and simply let's stay with this idea. We're going to the COP this year, which this year for the first time is going to work on sustainable food systems, and this regulation, along with other many tools, are going to be key pieces to push towards sustainable food systems. Many of these raw materials are the foundations of our food system, and the fight against deforestation must also be a fight towards to move towards sustainable food systems. There are many questions still up in the air. I hope that next year we will have a designated competent authority, and we will be able to move forward. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Gracias. Ciao.